Marcus Coleman didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He simply let the silence hang there, thick and suffocating, like a held breath in a room with no air left to give. "You're right," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They do expect it to be me, and that's exactly the plan." This is the story of how a system built to crush him became the very weapon he used to bring down a king. Atlanta's skyline glittered like scattered glass beneath a sky, the color of a fresh bruise, purple fading into black. 46 floors above the chaos of the streets, inside the gleaming tower of Sterling Continental Freight, Daniel Whitfield was putting the finishing touches on what he believed was the perfect crime. Daniel was Executive Vice President of Operations, a man who'd inherited his name, his network, and his entire worldview from a family that had never once been told no. To him, employees weren't people. They were entries on a balance sheet, useful until they weren't, disposable the moment they became inconvenient. And right now, Daniel had become very, very inconvenient to himself. $28 million had vanished from Sterling Continental's overseas holding accounts, funneled out through a maze of fake shipping invoices to cover a mountain of gambling losses, and a quiet, dangerous partnership with an Atlanta crime syndicate he never should have gotten close to. Federal regulators were already circling. An audit had been scheduled. The walls were closing in, and Daniel needed someone to take the fall. Someone with the right access, the right credentials, and, in his twisted mind, the right skin color to make the headlines write themselves. That someone was Marcus Coleman. Marcus ran global logistics for Sterling Continental. He'd grown up in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Atlanta's Mechanicsville neighborhood, the kind of place where ambition either gets crushed early or becomes the only thing keeping you alive. He chose the second path. He earned his master's degree in supply chain management from Emory, working overnight shifts to pay for it, sleeping 4 hours a night for 2 straight years. He coached a youth basketball league on weekends. He showed up. He always showed up. And that made him the perfect target. "It's almost poetic," Daniel muttered to himself one evening, swirling a glass of 25-year-old single malt in his corner office, staring down at a stack of meticulously forged paperwork spread across his desk like a winning hand of cards. For nearly 2 months, Daniel had quietly worked with a few compromised AT staffers to redirect the digital trail of the stolen funds straight toward Marcus's office terminal. They'd opened shell corporations in the British Virgin Islands, listing Marcus as the principal beneficiary, complete with forged signatures and stolen fingerprint data lifted from a routine HR security scan. Daniel's confidence wasn't built on cleverness. It was built on something far uglier, a calculated bet that the public, the press, and the boardroom would all swallow the same tired story without chewing. Ambitious black executive gets greedy, can't resist the temptation, finally shows his true colors. He was counting on prejudice to do the heavy lifting his evidence couldn't. Meanwhile, 2 offices down the hall, Marcus had been noticing things, small things at first. Shipping containers logged as arriving in ports they'd never actually reached. Millions of dollars routed to holding companies with no employees, no addresses, no real footprint at all, just names on paper. When he first raised it with Daniel, he was told it was a clerical glitch, nothing more. But Marcus wasn't the type to accept an answer that didn't add up. He kept digging, quietly, carefully. He copied encrypted ledgers onto a secured external drive and began connecting dots that were never meant to be connected. He knew he'd stumbled onto something dangerous. What he didn't know yet was just how close the trigger already was to his own head. On a Friday night, Daniel set the final piece of his plan into motion. He anonymously slipped a thick, fabricated financial dossier to a contact inside the district attorney's office, a prosecutor with a well-known appetite for splashy convictions, the kind that build a political career faster than actual justice ever could. The dossier framed Marcus as the singular architect of the largest embezzlement scandal in the company's history, complete with altered emails, manufactured wire transfers, and a fictional money trail connecting him to organized crime. That night, as Marcus packed up his briefcase, completely unaware that a guillotine blade hung just above his neck, Daniel watched his reflection in the office glass and smiled. He picked up a prepaid phone and dialed a number that didn't exist on any official record. "It's set," Daniel said, voice low and oily. "The file's with the DA. They're raiding the house Monday at dawn. Make sure our extra little gift gets planted before they kick the door in." "Understood, sir," came the gruff reply. Daniel hung up, satisfaction spreading across his face like spilled wine. He believed he'd built a cage with no exit. He thought Marcus was nothing more than a piece on a board he alone controlled. What he didn't understand was that this was never a game of chess. It was a trap, and Daniel had just walked into the very center of it with both feet. Monday morning arrived in a suburb just outside Atlanta with the sound of a door being torn off its hinges. It was barely past 5:15 in the morning. Marcus was standing in his kitchen, coffee pot still gurgling, when the front door of his home exploded inward. Tactical boots thundered through the hallway. Red laser dots sliced through the dim morning light, sweeping across walls and furniture. "Police, get down! Hands where we can see them now!" Marcus barely had a second to register what was happening before a hand seized his shoulder and slammed him face first onto the cold tile floor. Upstairs, his wife, Renee, screamed as two officers stormed up the staircase, weapons raised. "I'm not resisting," Marcus shouted, his cheek pressed hard against the floor. "I'm on the ground!" Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Within minutes, the home he and Renee had spent a decade building together was being dismantled piece by piece, bookshelves emptied onto the floor, couch cushions sliced open. Hard drives ripped out of computers and bagged as evidence. A grizzled detective named Hargrove strolled into the kitchen, looking down at Marcus with thinly veiled contempt. "Marcus Coleman, you're under arrest for grand theft, embezzlement, and money laundering. You've got the right to remain silent, and honestly, you should use it because you're staring down 20 years to life." "On whose authority?" Marcus asked, his voice eerily steady. "I haven't touched a cent that wasn't mine." "Tell it to the judge," Hargrove smirked. Within hours, news vans had swarmed the property. As Marcus was marched out in handcuffs, head bowed under an officer's palm, camera flashes erupted like a localized storm. By breakfast, every local news ticker read some version of the same headline: Sterling Continental executive arrested in massive embezzlement scandal. Daniel watched it all unfold from his 80-inch TV, sipping espresso with the calm satisfaction of a man watching a script play out exactly as written. The narrative was already taking hold. The public was already deciding Marcus's guilt before a single piece of evidence had been examined. But the real sleight of hand was happening back inside Marcus's home office. While chaos reigned through the rest of the house, a crooked officer on Daniel's payroll slipped unnoticed into the study. He pulled a small black notebook and a prepaid burner phone from his vest and tucked them deep inside a locked filing cabinet drawer. 10 minutes later, another investigator discovered them with theatrical surprise. The notebook was filled with handwritten codes matching the stolen funds. The phone contained a string of encrypted texts discussing wire transfers and drop locations, all crafted to look like they came from Marcus. It was the final devastating piece needed to transform a circumstantial case into something that looked airtight. As Marcus was loaded into the back of an armored transport van, the doors slamming shut and swallowing him into darkness, something shifted in him. The mask of panicked confusion he'd worn for the cameras began to dissolve. What replaced it was something far colder, far steadier. He let out a long, controlled breath. The hardest part, the part where he had to let them win, let them terrify his wife, let them parade him across every screen in the city, was finally over. Because Marcus knew something none of them did. He knew that black notebook and that burner phone were about to be logged into an evidence room where every single security camera had been quietly swapped out, 48 hours earlier. He knew the arresting officers were already under surveillance, because Marcus Coleman wasn't just a logistics executive. For the past 6 months, he had been working as a confidential informant for the FBI's Public Corruption Division, and the trap had just been sprung. The interrogation room reeked of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. For nearly 3 hours, Assistant District Attorney Reginald Cole and Detective Hargrove had been hammering Marcus with question after question, slapping forged documents and photographs of the planted ledger onto the steel table between them. "It's over, Coleman," Cole snarled, leaning in close. "We've got the offshore accounts. We've got the burner phone. We've got a digital trail a mile wide connecting your terminal to every dollar that's missing. Your boss, Daniel Whitfield, is fully cooperating. He's heartbroken over what you did. Give us the syndicate names now, plead guilty, and maybe I'll talk to the judge about letting you see daylight again before you turn 80. Marcus studied the fabricated paperwork in front of him. The forgery work was genuinely impressive. If he hadn't known better, he might have started to doubt his own memory. "I want my attorney," he said evenly. Cole laughed. "Your attorney's going to tell you the same thing I am. Take the deal." 10 minutes later, the heavy metal door swung open. A tall man in a sharply tailored charcoal suit stepped inside, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He didn't carry himself like a public defender drowning in caseloads. He moved like a man who owned the room before he'd even entered it. "My name is Special Agent Davis Reed," he announced, his baritone voice slicing cleanly through the tension. "I am Mr. Coleman's legal counsel. Gentlemen, you'll need to step outside. This interview is finished," Cole scoffed. "You get 5 minutes, counselor, before we book him." Reed reached into his jacket, pulled out a slim leather case, and flipped it open to reveal a gold federal shield. "Special Agent Davis Reed, FBI Public Corruption and Organized Crime Task Force. This is now a federal matter. Clear the room or I'll arrest you both for obstructing a federal investigation." The color drained from Cole's face instantly. Hargrove took an involuntary step backward. Neither said another word as they shuffled out, the door slamming behind them. Reed locked it, glanced at the one-way mirror to confirm it was inactive, and pulled out a small electronic device, sweeping it methodically across the table and walls. Once satisfied the room was clean, his rigid posture finally softened. He crossed the room and unlocked Marcus's handcuffs. "You holding up?" Reed asked, taking a seat across from him. Marcus rubbed his wrists, exhaustion and fury mixing in his eyes. "They terrified Renee. They tore my house apart, down to the studs. Tell me it was worth it, Davis. Tell me we actually have him." Reed opened his briefcase and slid out a thick classified file stamped with a federal seal. "Operation Glasshouse." "We have everything," Reed said, a sharp smile crossing his face. Daniel Whitfield swallowed the bait whole. "When you first came to us with those encrypted ledgers, we already suspected he was laundering money, but suspicion isn't proof. We needed him to commit an active crime on the record in real time. We needed him to incriminate himself." "And framing me was that crime," Marcus said grimly. "Exactly," Reed nodded. "Because you let yourself become the target. Whitfield got sloppy. The officer who planted that notebook in your house? We have him on hidden 4K footage from a camera we installed inside your smoke detector last week. The burner phone. Whitfield bought it himself at a kiosk downtown. We've got the receipt and the storefront camera footage. We've been monitoring his calls, his emails, every meeting he's had with the DA's office." Marcus leaned forward. "So we arrest him now?" "No," Reed said, his expression hardening. "If we move now, his lawyers spin it as rogue cops acting on their own. They drag it out for years and he slips through the cracks. We need him to bleed publicly. We need to take down his entire network, including the corrupt officials inside the DA's office who fast-tracked this case just to put another black man behind bars without asking a single real question." "So what's the play?" "We go to trial," Reed said. "We let them indict you. We let Daniel Whitfield take the witness stand, raise his right hand, swear an oath before God and country, and commit blatant perjury in front of a jury and a packed courtroom. Once he submits those forged documents under oath, the trap closes. There's no spin, no excuse, no way out." A jolt of adrenaline shot through Marcus's chest. It was an enormous risk. If the timing slipped even slightly, he could genuinely end up behind bars for decades. But then he thought of Daniel's smug, condescending sneer. The way the man had looked at him like he was disposable. He thought about every system that had let men like Daniel walk free, while people who looked like him paid the price for crimes they never committed. "All right," Marcus said, his voice settling into something unbreakable. "Let's give him his stage. Let him dig his own grave. I'll hand him the shovel myself." 4 months later, the Fulton County Courthouse had become a media circus. Reporters camped outside before sunrise. The Sterling Continental embezzlement trial had captivated the entire city, and in the public eye, Marcus Coleman had already been convicted, a symbol, they said, of corporate greed and betrayed trust. Inside Courtroom 5B, the tension was suffocating. Judge Patricia Reyes, a no-nonsense jurist known for running an airtight courtroom, presided over the packed gallery. At the prosecution's table, ADA Reginald Cole strutted with the confidence of a man already imagining his name on a campaign poster. At the defense table sat Marcus, dressed in a crisp navy suit, his expression a wall of practiced calm. Beside him sat Vanessa Pierce, a sharp federal defense attorney brought in specifically by the Bureau to play the part of his private counsel. To everyone watching, the defense looked outmatched. They'd called no witnesses, offered barely a handful of objections, and seemed resigned to losing. In the front row of the gallery sat Daniel Whitfield, dressed in mourning-adjacent solemnity, playing the part of the betrayed mentor for every camera in the room. But his eyes told a different story, flickers of malicious satisfaction every time they landed on Marcus. The prosecution calls Daniel Whitfield to the stand. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Daniel rose, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the witness box with practiced confidence. He placed his hand on the Bible, raised the other, and swore to tell the truth. Strike one, Marcus thought. Cole approached the podium. Mr. Whitfield, can you describe your professional relationship with the defendant? It was built on trust, Daniel said, his voice dripping with manufactured grief. I mentored him, I championed his promotions, I believed in him when others doubted he was ready for the executive floor. Finding out he used our company's systems to steal nearly $30 million, it shattered me. Cole nodded sympathetically. Mr. Whitfield, directing your attention to Exhibit D, the notebook recovered from the defendant's home. Can you identify the handwriting? Daniel slipped on a pair of reading glasses, studying the projected image. Without question, that's Marcus's handwriting. He used those codes to disguise the shipments. I also personally reviewed the IP logs from his office terminal. The digital trail shows the transfers were made while he was logged in, alone in his office. For nearly 2 hours, Daniel spun an elaborate, devastating tapestry of lies. He authenticated forged documents. He described conversations that never happened. He painted Marcus as a desperate man who'd let greed consume his judgment. With every fabricated detail, the jury's expressions hardened just a little more. Thank you, Mr. Whitfield, Cole said triumphantly, turning toward the defense table with a satisfied grin. Your witness. Daniel settled back into the witness chair and shot Marcus a small, mocking tilt of the head. I win, the look said. You lose. Vanessa Pierce rose slowly. No legal pad, no binder, just her walking to the center of the courtroom, heels clicking against the polished wood floor like the steady ticking of a clock counting down. Mr. Whitfield, she began, her voice quiet but carrying an unsettling clarity through the silent room. You just testified under oath that you personally reviewed the IP logs from Mr. Coleman's computer. Correct? Correct, Daniel said confidently. And you testified that the handwriting in that notebook belongs to him. Without question. Vanessa smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the smile of someone who'd just heard a trap snap closed. Mr. Whitfield, are you familiar with how federal financial crimes investigations operate? Daniel's eye twitched, almost imperceptibly. I'm aware, generally, yes. Are you also aware, Vanessa said, her voice rising slightly, that it is a federal offense to knowingly submit forged evidence to a court, to conspire to frame a private citizen, and to launder funds on behalf of an organized crime network? Objection, Cole shouted, slamming his palm on the table. Counsel is testifying, Your Honor, not asking questions. Overruled, Judge Reyes said sharply, leaning forward. I'll allow it. Tread carefully, Counselor. Vanessa turned back to Daniel. Would it surprise you to learn that Marcus Coleman has not used his office terminal to transfer a single file in over 6 months? Because for the past 6 months, that terminal has been entirely monitored and mirrored by the Cybercrimes Division of the FBI? The courtroom fell into dead silence. It felt as though the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Daniel's confident mask cracked open, raw fear pooling behind his eyes. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Vanessa didn't give him a moment to recover. Your Honor, she announced, her voice ringing like a struck bell. The defense calls its first rebuttal witness, Special Agent Davis Reed of the FBI Public Corruption Division. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Agent Reed strode down the center aisle, flanked by 4 federal marshals and 2 forensic accountants. The gallery erupted into chaotic whispering. Reporters shot to their feet. Cole looked as though he might be physically ill. Daniel's knuckles went white as he gripped the edge of the witness box. He looked over at Marcus. Marcus wasn't looking away this time. He stared right back, eyes burning with the quiet fire of a man who had walked through hell on purpose just to drag the devil down with him. Reed took the stand, presenting his credentials to the stunned jury. Agent Reed, Vanessa began, can you explain your relationship with the defendant? Marcus Coleman has served as a sworn confidential informant for the FBI for the past 6 months, Reed stated clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. He came to our office with documented evidence of large-scale corporate embezzlement. Under our direct supervision, he knowingly allowed himself to become the target of a framing conspiracy orchestrated by the man seated at the defense table. Daniel Whitfield. "Objection! This is completely fabricated," Cole shouted, his political future evaporating in real time. "Sit down, Mr. Cole," Judge Reyes thundered, slamming her gavel hard enough to splinter the wood. "I want to hear every word of this testimony. Proceed, Agent Reed." Vanessa activated the courtroom projector. Instead of the prosecution's manufactured documents, a high-definition video filled the screen, footage from a hidden camera angled down from a ceiling smoke detector. It showed Detective Hargrove slipping into Marcus's study, pulling the black notebook from his vest and shoving it into a locked filing cabinet. The timestamp confirmed it was recorded 10 minutes before the official search team supposedly discovered it. Gasps rippled through the jury box. Several jurors covered their mouths in disbelief. "What exactly are we looking at, Agent Reed?" Vanessa asked. "A corrupt police officer, currently receiving payments from Daniel Whitfield, planting fabricated evidence inside the home of my confidential informant," Reed answered coldly. "And the burner phone?" The screen switched to surveillance footage from a downtown electronics kiosk. It clearly showed Daniel Whitfield handing a clerk cash in exchange for the exact device later entered into evidence. "The serial numbers match precisely," Reed confirmed. By now Daniel was visibly trembling. Sweat soaked through his collar. His eyes darted around the courtroom, searching desperately for an exit. But federal marshals had already quietly sealed off every door. "And finally, Agent Reed," Vanessa said, holding up a small flash drive. "Tell the court about the missing funds." "We traced the IP addresses used to move the money," Reed explained, turning to face the jury directly. "While the logs were spoofed to appear as though they originated from Mr. Coleman's terminal, our cyber unit traced the actual signal back to a private encrypted laptop registered to Daniel Whitfield's penthouse residence. We also obtained a court-authorized wiretap on Mr. Whitfield's personal phone." Vanessa pressed a button on her remote. A recording began to play through the courtroom speakers, Daniel's own voice, crisp, arrogant, and unmistakable, recorded mere hours before Marcus's arrest. "It's set. The file's with the DA. They're raiding the house Monday at dawn. Make sure our extra little gift gets planted before they kick the door in. It's perfect. They'll see a black man with sudden money and stop asking questions. He's taking the fall for everything." The recording clicked off. What followed was a silence so total it felt almost violent. Every juror stared at Daniel Whitfield with raw, unfiltered disgust. The bigotry, the corruption, the sheer calculated cruelty of his plan had just been laid bare for the entire courtroom, and soon the entire country to witness. The narrative Daniel had spent months carefully constructing had collapsed into a noose, and it had just tightened around his own neck. "Your Honor," Vanessa said, turning to the bench, "the defense moves for immediate dismissal of all charges against Marcus Coleman with prejudice. We further request the court detain the witness, Daniel Whitfield, for federal custody." Judge Reyes turned her gaze on Daniel, fury blazing in her eyes. "Mr. Whitfield, you have made an absolute mockery of this court. You weaponized the justice system to destroy an innocent man's life and reputation." She brought her gavel down hard. "Case dismissed. All charges against Mr. Coleman are dropped, effective immediately." Before the gallery could even begin to react, Agent Reed rose from the witness stand, pulled a set of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt, and walked directly toward Daniel. "Daniel Whitfield," Reed announced, his voice cutting through the rising commotion. "You are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation on charges of perjury, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, wire fraud, and racketeering. Hands behind your back." Daniel staggered backward, nearly collapsing. "This is insane. You can't do this. Do you have any idea who my family is?" "I don't care if you're royalty," Reed said, gripping Daniel's shoulder and spinning him around against the wooden railing. The sharp click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Across the room, Cole slumped into his chair, head in his hands, fully aware his career, and possibly his freedom, had just ended. Detective Hargrove, standing near the back exit, tried to bolt, only to be tackled to the marble floor by two waiting marshals and cuffed within seconds. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Reporters trampled over each other, rushing toward the exits, desperate to be first with the most explosive legal twist the city had seen in years. The man who had walked in as the grieving star witness was being dragged out as the architect of the entire conspiracy. Marcus remained seated at the defense table. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that released 6 months of accumulated terror, exhaustion, and grief all at once. Vanessa rested a hand gently on his shoulder. You did it, Marcus. You held the line when most people would have broken. Marcus stood, straightening his jacket, and stepped directly into Daniel's path as Agent Reed escorted the disgraced executive toward a side exit. Daniel's suit was wrinkled now, his hair disheveled, the polished predator replaced by a broken man staring down decades behind bars. "You set me up," Daniel hissed, tears of humiliation welling in his eyes. "You destroyed my life." Marcus looked down at him, his expression unreadable, unforgiving. "No, Daniel, I just gave you enough rope. You tied the noose yourself and jumped without anyone pushing you. You thought my life was worth nothing. You thought my skin made me an easy target. You were wrong about all of it." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to something only Daniel could hear. "Enjoy federal prison. I hear legacy doesn't mean much in there." Reed pulled Daniel forward, dragging the weeping, broken man out into the hallway, where the same flashbulbs that had once condemned Marcus on every news channel in the city now turned their lenses on Daniel's downfall instead. Within 48 hours, the consequences came fast and merciless. Sterling Continental's board fired Daniel immediately, stripping his stock options and pension in one swift motion. Federal authorities seized his assets under racketeering statutes, his penthouse, his luxury cars, his offshore accounts, all of it gone. His wife filed for divorce within the week, walking away with whatever remained. And the criminal syndicate he'd partnered with, furious that he'd exposed their entire laundering operation, placed a bounty on his head, forcing the Bureau of Prisons to keep him in permanent solitary confinement, just to keep him alive. Marcus Coleman walked out of the federal building 2 days later, his arm wrapped around Renee, sunlight breaking across the Atlanta skyline behind them. In a desperate attempt to repair its public image and avoid further federal scrutiny, Sterling Continental's board offered Marcus the position of CEO, along with a substantial settlement for everything he and his family had endured. He accepted. He moved into the corner office that had once belonged to Daniel Whitfield, but he didn't celebrate with a glass of expensive scotch. Instead, he immediately overhauled the company's financial transparency protocols and launched a major scholarship fund for kids from underserved neighborhoods across the city, the kind of neighborhoods he himself had once called home. They had tried to bury the wrong man, but they didn't realize that what they buried was a seed, and from everything they threw on top of him, he grew into something none of them could ever have stopped. What an absolutely wild turn of events. Daniel Whitfield believed he was playing a simple game of chess, never realizing Marcus Coleman had wired the entire board to detonate the moment he made his move. That's what real, earned justice looks like. Watching a corrupt, arrogant system try to crush an innocent man, only to watch the trap snap shut on the actual villain, live in the middle of a packed federal courtroom. Justice here wasn't just served quietly behind closed doors, it was delivered in front of cameras, in front of a jury, in front of the entire world watching. If this story of resilience, undercover sacrifice, and courtroom justice hit you right in the chest, drop a like. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that patience and integrity can outlast even the most powerful liars. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story like this one. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Let me know down in the comments.